For 25 years, Gerald and I had quietly celebrated our wedding anniversary the same way, just the two of us, a candlelit dinner at home, and a slow dance in our living room to the same Frank Sinatra record we played at our wedding. This year was going to be different. We had finally booked that romantic weekend getaway to Mendocino we'd been dreaming about for years. Until I walked into my own backyard that Friday afternoon and found 30 strangers setting up tables and stringing lights while my daughter Cassandra directed them like she was planning the Met Gala. Surprise, Mom! I threw you and Dad the anniversary party you've always deserved. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood there frozen, my car keys still clutched in my hand, watching a catering truck unload trays of food I didn't order for people I barely knew. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a party. This was about how my own daughter saw me, as someone whose plans, feelings, and boundaries simply didn't matter. The afternoon sun felt harsh against my face as I watched strangers trampling through my carefully tended rose garden, the same roses Gerald and I had planted together on our 5th anniversary. A woman in a bright yellow apron was arranging folding chairs around my grandmother's antique patio table, the one Gerald had refinished by hand as a surprise for my 50th birthday. Another person was tying balloons to my Japanese maple tree, the delicate branches bending under the weight of oversized silver hearts that caught the light like cheap jewelry. "Cassandra!" I called out, my voice barely carrying over the commotion. She turned, her face glowing with the kind of satisfaction that comes from orchestrating what she clearly thought was the perfect surprise. At 32, she still had that same expression she wore as a child when she'd rearranged my living room furniture without asking, convinced she knew better than I did what would make me happy. "Isn't it wonderful, Mom? I invited everyone, your old colleagues from the library, the neighbors, even some of Dad's golf buddies. Mrs. Hendricks from down the street is bringing her famous potato salad, and I hired that string quartet that played at my college graduation. Remember how much you love them?" My mouth opened, but no words came out. Behind her, I could see more cars pulling into our driveway. People were already arriving, clutching wrapped gifts and bottles of wine, their faces bright with anticipation for a party I never wanted. Gerald's Honda was conspicuously absent from the garage. He was still at his doctor's appointment, completely unaware that our quiet anniversary dinner had been transformed into a public spectacle. "But honey," I finally managed, "Dad and I already have plans. We're leaving for Mendocino tomorrow morning. I packed our bags this morning. The hotel is expecting us." Cassandra waved her hand dismissively, the same gesture she'd used since childhood when adults tried to explain why her ideas wouldn't work. "Oh, you can go to Mendocino anytime. This is special. When will you ever have another 25th anniversary? I've been planning this for months, Mom. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word hit me like a slap. I should be grateful that my daughter had bulldozed through our carefully made plans, invaded our private space, and turned our intimate anniversary into a public performance. I should be grateful that she'd spent months planning something we never asked for, while never once thinking to ask what we actually wanted. "Cassandra, you didn't ask us," I said quietly. "We made these plans 6 months ago. The hotel room is paid for. We've been looking forward to this trip for years." She rolled her eyes. And in that moment, I saw not my adult daughter, but the teenager who used to tell me I didn't understand anything about having fun. "Mom, you're being dramatic. A weekend at some bed and breakfast versus a beautiful party with all your friends, which sounds better to you?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. She genuinely believed she was saving me from my own boring choices, rescuing me from an anniversary that wasn't grand enough, public enough, impressive enough. She had no idea that Gerald and I had spent countless evenings planning this trip, researching restaurants, mapping out coastal walks, imagining quiet mornings with coffee and ocean views. She didn't know that Gerald had already called ahead to arrange for champagne and strawberries to be waiting in our room, that I had bought a new dress specifically for our anniversary dinner overlooking the cliffs. More cars were arriving now. I recognized Jim and Patricia from Gerald's office, both of them walking up our front path with identical confused expressions. They probably thought they'd gotten the wrong address. Behind them came the Watsons from 3 houses down, carrying a gift bag and looking overdressed for what they probably assumed was a casual backyard barbecue.
How many people did you invite? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Just 30, Cassandra said brightly, as if 30 uninvited guests in our backyard was perfectly reasonable. I kept it small. I could have invited way more, but I know you get overwhelmed with big crowds.
Small. 30 people was small to her. Our actual plan, 2 people who loved each other sharing a quiet weekend by the ocean, was apparently too small to matter. I watched a man I didn't recognize testing the microphone that had somehow appeared near our back deck, his voice crackling through the speakers as he adjusted the volume. When had our backyard become a venue? When had our anniversary become a performance? Cassandra, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I need you to call everyone and tell them there's been a mistake. Dad and I appreciate the thought, but we already have plans. She stared at me like I'd suggested canceling Christmas. Mom, I can't do that. People are already here. I paid the caterers. The quartet will be here in an hour. You can't just cancel a party because you'd rather hide away in some hotel room. Hide away. That's what she called our romantic getaway, hiding away, as if wanting to spend our anniversary alone together was some kind of character flaw, some failure to appreciate the grand gesture she'd orchestrated without our consent. I looked around at the chaos in my backyard, at the strangers arranging my space to suit their needs, at the daughter who truly believed she knew better than I did what would make me happy. And that's when I realized this wasn't really about the party at all. This was about something much deeper, something that had been building for years without my even noticing. This was about a daughter who had never learned that her parents were real people with their own desires, their own dreams, their own right to make decisions about their own lives. This was about a pattern I had somehow allowed to develop, where my feelings were less important than other people's plans, where my boundaries were suggestions rather than requirements. Gerald's car pulled into the driveway just as the string quartet began unloading their instruments. Through the windshield, I could see his face change from confusion to dismay as he took in the scene. Our eyes met across the chaos, and I saw in his expression the same realization that was dawning on me. This wasn't just about a ruined anniversary. This was about respect. This was about being seen as people whose opinions mattered, whose choices deserved consideration, whose love story was worth celebrating on their own terms, rather than someone else's. And as I stood there watching 30 strangers prepare to celebrate an anniversary that no longer felt like ours, I knew something had to change. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Gerald walked through the backyard gate with the careful steps of a man trying to navigate a minefield. His face had gone pale, and I could see him taking in the full scope of what Cassandra had done. The rented tables, the catering setup, the stream of neighbors already helping themselves to appetizers from trades that appeared out of nowhere. When his eyes found mine across the chaos, I saw my own confusion and hurt reflected back at me. "What's happening here?" he asked quietly, setting down his car keys on our patio table that was now draped with a rental cloth decorated with silver wedding bells. "Dad," Cassandra rushed over, her arms outstretched like she was greeting a war hero. "Surprise! I threw you and Mom the most amazing anniversary party. Look at this turnout. Everyone wanted to celebrate you two." Gerald's jaw worked silently for a moment. I watched him process the same shock I was still feeling, the realization that our daughter had completely disregarded our wishes and invaded our space without a second thought. But what hurt more than the invasion itself was the expectation written all over Cassandra's face. She genuinely believed we should be grateful. She expected us to smile, to hug her, to tell her what a wonderful surprise this was. "Cassie," Gerald said, using the childhood nickname that usually softened any disagreement between them. "Your mother and I have reservations in Mendocino. We're supposed to leave tomorrow morning." "Oh, come on, Dad. You can go to Mendocino next weekend. This is happening right now, and it's going to be incredible. I even got Mrs. Chen from the library to come. Remember how much you used to love her book recommendations, Mom? I blinked. Mrs. Chen had retired 8 years ago. I barely knew her well enough to wave hello in the grocery store, yet somehow she was now standing in my backyard, looking as confused as I felt. The disconnect was staggering. Cassandra had invited people based on some outdated version of who she thought we were, or maybe who she thought we should be. Honey, I tried again. We really appreciate the effort, but we can't just cancel our trip. We've been planning this for months. Planning what? Sitting in some hotel room? This is so much better. She gestured wildly at the growing crowd. Look around you. When's the last time you had this many friends in one place?
Friends. I looked around at the faces. Gerald's coworkers, who we saw twice a year at office parties, neighbors we exchanged pleasantries with over the fence, people from my old job who I hadn't spoken to since retirement. These weren't friends. They were acquaintances at best. People Cassandra had somehow convinced to show up to celebrate a couple they barely knew. Cassandra, Gerald said, his voice taking on the edge it got when he was trying very hard to stay calm. We need to talk, privately. Dad, relax. Everything's under control. The food will be ready in an hour, the quartet is setting up, and I even hired a photographer to capture everything. You'll thank me later when you see how beautiful the pictures are. A photographer. She'd hired a photographer to document an event we never wanted, featuring guests we never invited, celebrating an anniversary we'd planned to spend alone together. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I watched a young man with an expensive camera already taking candid shots of Gerald's stunned expression. "Stop," I said, louder than I intended. "Stop taking pictures." The photographer looked confused but lowered his camera. Cassandra spun around, her eyebrows drawn together in the way they used to when she was a toddler whose building blocks had been disturbed. "Mom, what's wrong with you? You're acting like this is some kind of disaster instead of the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given you." The most thoughtful gift. I stared at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something that made my heart sink. She truly believed this. In her mind, she had rescued us from our own boring, inadequate plans and given us something spectacular instead. She couldn't see that what we actually wanted, quiet time together, intimate conversation, the chance to remember why we fell in love, was not just different from what she was offering, but completely opposite to it. "It's not that we don't appreciate the thought," Gerald began, but Cassandra cut him off. "Then why are you both acting like I ruined your lives? Look around. Everyone's having a great time. Mrs. Patterson brought that apple pie you love, Dad. The Hendersons drove over from Sacramento because they wanted to be here for you. And you're complaining because you might miss one weekend at some random hotel." Random hotel. Our carefully chosen bed and breakfast overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the place we'd researched for hours reading reviews and looking at photos of the room with the fireplace and the private balcony, that was random to her? But this circus in our backyard, this gathering of near strangers eating catered food while a string quartet played background music for conversations we never wanted to have, this was meaningful. I watched Gerald run his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was overwhelmed. We'd been married long enough that I could read his thoughts. How do we get out of this without hurting everyone's feelings? How do we make this right without making Cassandra cry? How do we salvage our anniversary when it's already been turned into someone else's vision of what our marriage should look like? And that's when it hit me. This wasn't really about the party. This was about how Cassandra saw us, not as two people with our own desires and dreams, but as characters in her story, props in her version of what a proper anniversary celebration should be. She'd never once asked what we wanted because it had never occurred to her that what we wanted might be different from what she thought we should want. "Cassandra," I said, trying to keep my voice steady,
When you were planning this, did you ever think about asking us what we wanted for our anniversary? She looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Why would I ask? It's a surprise. That's the whole point. But what if we didn't want a surprise? What if we preferred to celebrate privately? Mom, you're 25 years married. That's a huge milestone. You can't just ignore it. We weren't ignoring it. We were celebrating it exactly the way we wanted to. In some hotel room where nobody else gets to be part of it, that's not a celebration. That's just hiding. There it was again, the same word she'd used before, hiding, as if our desire for privacy was shameful, as if wanting to spend our anniversary without an audience was some kind of character flaw. I looked at the crowd gathering in our backyard, people taking selfies by our rose bushes, helping themselves to our outdoor furniture, making small talk about topics that had nothing to do with our marriage or our love story, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't about being grateful for a thoughtful gesture. This was about being seen and respected as adults, capable of making our own decisions about our own lives. This was about boundaries, about the right to say no, about being allowed to want what we wanted without having to justify it to someone who thought she knew better. Gerald caught my eye, and I saw the same realization dawning on his face. We'd spent 25 years building a marriage based on mutual respect, quiet understanding, and the deep pleasure of each other's company. And our own daughter couldn't see the value in any of that because it didn't fit her definition of how love should be displayed.
The string quartet began their first song, our wedding song, which I was sure Cassandra thought was a touching detail. But hearing it played for strangers in our backyard, turned into background music for a party we never wanted, felt like a violation of something sacred. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what we should be doing right now. Gerald and I should be having a quiet dinner, maybe looking through our old photo albums, talking about our favorite memories from the past year. Instead, we were standing in our own backyard, feeling like unwelcome guests at someone else's party. When I opened my eyes, Cassandra was looking at me with growing frustration. "Mom, people are starting to notice that you're not mingling. This is supposed to be your party." And there it was, the expectation that we would perform happiness, that we would pretend this was what we wanted, that we would smile and play along with her vision rather than honor our own. I looked at Gerald, at the defeat in his shoulders, and I knew we had a choice to make. We could go along with this, protect everyone's feelings, and lose our anniversary entirely, or we could do something we'd apparently never taught our daughter was acceptable. We could say no. Standing there watching strangers mill around our backyard, I found myself remembering the exact moment this pattern began. Cassandra was 7 years old, and I was in the kitchen preparing a simple birthday dinner for Gerald, his favorite meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and the chocolate cake I always made from scratch. Nothing fancy, just the three of us and the quiet celebration he preferred after long days at the accounting firm. Cassandra had other ideas. She'd spent the afternoon calling Gerald's coworkers from the phone book, inviting them to a surprise party she was throwing for her daddy. By 5 o'clock, our small dining room was packed with confused colleagues and their spouses, all holding hastily wrapped gifts and trying to make conversation while Gerald stood frozen in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes. "Surprise, Daddy," Cassandra had squealed, throwing her arms around his legs. "I made you the best birthday party ever." I should have recognized the warning signs then, the way she'd dismissed my gentle explanation that Daddy preferred quiet birthdays, the way she'd rolled her eyes when I suggested we keep it simple, the way she'd taken my credit card from my purse and called the bakery to order a massive sheet cake decorated with cartoon characters that had nothing to do with Gerald's interests. But she was 7. Children don't understand adult preferences, I told myself. She'll learn boundaries as she grows up. Except she didn't. At 12, she redecorated our living room while Gerald and I were at his mother's funeral, moving furniture and hanging posters because she thought our house looked too boring for people our age.
We came home exhausted and grieving to find our quiet sanctuary transformed into something that looked like a teenager's bedroom, complete with neon throw pillows and a disco ball she'd somehow convinced the neighbor boy to help her install. "I wanted to cheer you up," she explained when I asked why she'd rearranged our entire home without permission. "The house was so sad and old-looking. Now it's fun." Fun. That became her justification for everything. Our carefully chosen earth tone color scheme wasn't fun. Our classical music wasn't fun. Our quiet dinner conversations weren't fun. According to Cassandra, Gerald and I were living our lives wrong, and it was her job to fix us. At 16, she threw me a surprise 50th birthday party that I specifically asked her not to plan. I'd been very clear. I wanted to spend the day hiking with Gerald, just the two of us, maybe dinner at our favorite quiet restaurant. Instead, I came home from work to find our house full of women I barely knew from various stages of my life. Old college roommates I hadn't spoken to in decades, former neighbors who'd moved away years ago, distant relatives who lived 3 states away. "I tracked down everyone who's ever been important to you," Cassandra announced proudly, as if collecting people like baseball cards was some kind of achievement. "Mom, you never celebrate yourself properly. I had to show you how special you are." The problem wasn't that she wanted to celebrate me. The problem was that her version of celebration bore no resemblance to what actually made me happy. I spent my 50th birthday making small talk with strangers in my own home, answering the same questions over and over again, watching people I barely remember eat cake and make toasts about shared memories that were either forgotten or completely fabricated. Gerald found me crying in our bedroom at midnight. "She means well," he said, the phrase that had become our mantra whenever Cassandra bulldozed through our boundaries. "She just wants us to be happy." But that was the problem, wasn't it? She wanted us to be happy according to her definition of happiness. Our actual happiness, the joy we found in quiet moments, intimate conversations, and shared solitude, didn't register as valid to her. It was too small, too private, too different from the loud public displays of affection that she'd apparently decided were the only real way to show love.
In college, she majored in event planning, which should have been our first clue that we were in for a lifetime of unsolicited celebrations. Every holiday became an opportunity for her to demonstrate her professional skills on us. Christmas went from a quiet morning exchanging a few meaningful gifts to elaborate productions with themed decorations, catered brunches, and guest lists that included anyone who'd ever shown us the slightest kindness. "You can't just have Christmas with the 3 of us," she'd insist. "What about Mrs. Thompson next door? She's all alone. What about Dad's assistant who doesn't have family nearby? What about the mailman who's always so nice to you?" Before we knew it, our living room was full of people who were essentially strangers, all gathered to celebrate our holiday while Gerald and I sat in the corner feeling like guests at our own Christmas. The beautiful, quiet traditions we'd built over the years, reading Christmas stories by the fire, sharing our favorite memories from the year, the peaceful intimacy of a family morning were swept away in favor of Cassandra's vision of what a proper celebration should look like. When she graduated and started her own event planning business, things only got worse. Every milestone in our lives became a professional opportunity for her to showcase her talents. My retirement party was held at a fancy hotel ballroom with an open bar and a 5-course dinner, despite my repeated requests for a simple gathering at home. Gerald's promotion at work was celebrated with a cocktail party at an upscale restaurant, complete with speeches and a professional photographer, even though he'd specifically asked for no recognition at all. "You can't just ignore these important moments," became her standard response to our protests. "People need to know how proud we are of you. You need to let others celebrate your successes." But we didn't need that. We never had. Gerald and I had built our relationship on the understanding that the most meaningful moments were often the smallest ones. The quiet pride in each other's accomplishments, the private jokes that made us laugh, the comfortable silences that spoke of deep understanding. We didn't need external validation because we had each other's recognition, and that had always been enough.
Cassandra, however, seemed to see our contentment as a problem to be solved. She couldn't understand how two people could be genuinely happy without constant social interaction, public recognition, and elaborate celebrations. In her mind, we were settling for less than we deserved, and it was her responsibility to give us more. The irony was, in trying to give us more, she was actually taking away what we valued most. Every time she threw us a party we didn't want, she stole the opportunity for us to celebrate in our own way. Every time she invited strangers into our private moments, she diluted the intimacy that made those moments special to us. Every time she dismissed our preferences in favor of her own vision, she sent the message that our feelings didn't matter as much as her ideas about what our feelings should be. And we let her. For 25 years, we let her, because challenging her meant risking her tears, her accusations that we didn't appreciate her efforts, her wounded declarations that she was only trying to make us happy. It was easier to smile and go along with her elaborate productions than to have the difficult conversation about boundaries, respect, and the difference between love and control. But standing in our backyard watching 30 strangers eat appetizers and pose for photos at what was supposed to be our intimate anniversary celebration, I finally understood what we'd lost in all those years of accommodation. We'd lost ourselves. We'd become performers in Cassandra's vision of what our lives should look like, rather than the authors of our own story. We taught her through our silence and compliance that our wishes were negotiable, our boundaries were suggestions, and our happiness was secondary to her need to orchestrate grand gestures. We taught her a daughter who genuinely believed she knew better than we did what would make us happy, and who felt entitled to override our choices whenever they didn't align with her vision. Gerald caught my eye across the crowd and raised his eyebrows slightly, our old signal for, "We need to talk." I nodded, understanding immediately. We'd spent years having these silent conversations in the middle of Cassandra's unwanted celebrations, commiserating wordlessly while publicly playing our assigned roles as grateful parents. But this time felt different. This time, something in me had shifted. Maybe it was the sight of strangers photographing our private space, or the sound of our wedding song being performed for people who didn't know our story, or the realization that our silver anniversary, this once-in-a-lifetime milestone, was being turned into someone else's event. Or maybe I was just finally tired of being grateful for things I never asked for, tired of pretending that good intentions justified complete disregard for our feelings, tired of watching our daughter turn every meaningful moment into a performance for people who didn't actually know or care about us. As I watched the photographer capture candid shots of Gerald looking uncomfortable and me looking lost, I realized we had a choice to make. We could continue to play our roles as the appreciative parents who never complained about their daughter's generosity, or we could finally have the conversation we should have had 25 years ago.
The question was, did we have the courage to disappoint her in order to save ourselves? The evidence of how thoroughly Cassandra had dismissed our autonomy became clearer as the afternoon wore on. I discovered it piece by piece, like assembling a puzzle that revealed a picture I didn't want to see. First, there was the guest book. Cassandra had set up an elegant stand near our front door with a leather-bound book and a sign that read, "Share your memories of Gerald and Diane's beautiful love story." I flipped through the pages while pretending to greet arrivals, and what I found made my stomach clench. Entry after entry from people who barely knew us, writing generic well wishes about a marriage they'd never witnessed. "Wishing you many more years of happiness," wrote Jim's wife from Gerald's office, a woman I'd met exactly twice in 15 years. "You two are such an inspiration," gushed someone who signed themselves as Karen from the library, though I couldn't place any Karen from my library days. Page after page of shallow sentiments from people who were essentially strangers, all pretending to have meaningful connections to our marriage. But it was the last entry that stopped me cold. Cassandra had written a full page in her careful script. "Mom and Dad never celebrate themselves the way they deserve. They're too humble, too private, too willing to let important moments pass by quietly. Today, I'm giving them the celebration their love story deserves.
The kind of party that shows the world how special they are. I know they'll try to say it's too much, but that's just who they are. They don't know how to let people love them properly. Let people love them properly? As if our 25 years of quiet devotion to each other was somehow insufficient, somehow wrong. As if the way we chose to love each other needed correction by someone who had never experienced marriage herself. I closed the book and walked toward the catering setup, hoping to find some refuge in the familiar act of checking on food preparation. What I discovered there was even more disturbing. The caterer, a pleasant woman named Rosa, approached me with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted to double-check the menu with you. Your daughter was very specific about what you and your husband like, but some of her requests seemed unusual for an anniversary celebration." She showed me the order form, and I stared at it in disbelief. Cassandra had ordered what she thought were our favorite foods, but she'd gotten almost everything wrong. Mini quiches. I was allergic to eggs. Shrimp cocktail. Gerald had stopped eating shellfish years ago after a bad reaction. Chocolate fountain with strawberries. We were both diabetic and had been carefully managing our sugar intake for the past 3 years. "She insisted you loved these things," Rosa continued apologetically. "She said you were just too polite to ask for what you really wanted. She seemed very confident about the choices." Too polite to ask for what we really wanted? The phrase echoed in my mind as I looked at tables full of food we couldn't eat, ordered by someone who claimed to know us better than we knew ourselves. How had our own daughter become so disconnected from our actual lives that she didn't even know our dietary restrictions? "There's also the matter of the timing," she added quietly. "Your daughter scheduled this for 6 hours. She said you and your husband were the type of people who would be too shy to end a party, so she wanted to make sure there was enough programming to fill the whole evening. She's planned speeches, games, and a slideshow presentation about your relationship." 6 hours. A slideshow presentation. My hands started to shake as I realized the full scope of what Cassandra had orchestrated. This wasn't just a party, it was a marathon event designed to keep us trapped in our own backyard performing gratitude for an audience of strangers while our actual anniversary plans evaporated. I excused myself and walked to our bedroom, needing a moment to process what I was learning. On my dresser, I found more evidence of Cassandra's planning. A thick folder labeled "Mom and Dad's 25th Anniversary Surprise" sat next to my jewelry box. Inside were printed emails, guest lists, vendor contracts, and a detailed timeline that made my blood run cold. She'd been planning this for 6 months. 6 months during which Gerald and I had been excitedly discussing our Mendocino trip, researching restaurants, planning walks along the coast. 6 months during which she'd never once asked about our preferences, never mentioned her alternative plans, never considered that we might have our own vision for our anniversary. The guest list was particularly revealing. Names I recognized were marked with notes in Cassandra's handwriting. Dad's old college friend, lost touch but found on Facebook. Mom's cousin from Portland, haven't seen in 10 years but she'll drive down. Neighbors from our old house, moved away but might come for nostalgia. She'd assembled people from our past like artifacts in a museum, bringing together fragments of our history without considering whether these connections were ones we valued or wanted to maintain. The woman who'd lived next door to us 15 years ago was coming with her new husband, whom we'd never met. My college roommate was driving 4 hours with her teenage sons, who didn't know us at all. But the most damning evidence was a printed email thread between Cassandra and her business partner, Tiffany. I knew I shouldn't read it, but I couldn't stop myself.
"This is going to be such a portfolio piece for us," Tiffany had written. "A silver anniversary party with this many guests? We need to document everything. Make sure the photographer gets shots of all the key moments. First dance, speech reactions, gift opening. This could be featured in that wedding magazine that's been asking for our work." Cassandra's response made me sink onto the edge of the bed. "I know. Mom and Dad are going to be so grateful when they see how professional everything looks. They never do anything worth photographing, so this will give them something beautiful to remember. Plus, the networking opportunities are amazing. Half these guests are in our target demographic for future clients. Worth photographing."
our quiet dinners, our morning walks, our evening conversations on the porch, none of that was worth photographing in her mind. Our love story only became valuable when it was transformed into content for her business portfolio. I kept reading, unable to stop despite the growing nausea in my stomach. The only challenge is managing their expectations, Cassandra had written. They're going to try to downplay everything and act like they don't deserve a big celebration. I've learned to just ignore their protest and push forward. They don't know what they want. They're too used to settling for less. Too used to settling for less. There it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven years of boundary violations. In Cassandra's mind, our contentment with simple pleasures wasn't a choice. It was a limitation. Our preference for privacy wasn't a personality trait. It was a problem to be solved. Our satisfaction with quiet love wasn't enough. It needed to be amplified, publicized, and turned into a performance for others. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the folder, but not before seeing one more damning piece of evidence. At the bottom of the email thread was a message from yesterday. Don't worry if they seem resistant at first. Once the party gets going and they see how happy everyone is, they'll come around. I've never met parents who never eventually appreciate being celebrated properly. Celebrated properly. As if there was a correct way to love someone, a proper formula for meaningful moments, a right way to mark important milestones. As if our 25 years of marriage had somehow been insufficient until she decided to fix them. Gerald appeared in the doorway, his face grim. I just talked to Bob Henderson. He and Marie drove 3 hours to get here. Cassandra told them we specifically requested their presence because we'd been missing them terribly. We haven't spoken to the Hendersons in 2 years, I replied numbly. I know. And Bob mentioned that Cassandra told their attendance crucial for Mom and Dad's happiness. She made it sound like we'd be devastated if they didn't come. The manipulation was breathtaking. Cassandra hadn't just invited people without our permission. She'd lied to them about our wishes, used our supposed feelings as leverage to ensure attendance, and created a web of false expectations that would now be impossible to untangle without hurting innocent people who'd made significant efforts to be here. There's more, Gerald continued, his voice heavy. I found the invoice for the photographer. She's charging this to our credit card, the one she has access to for emergencies. Our credit card. She was making us pay for our own imprisonment, billing us for the privilege of having our anniversary stolen and turned into someone else's vision. The violation felt complete. She'd taken our plans, our space, our celebration, and now our money, all while convinced she was doing us a favor. I showed Gerald the folder I'd found, watching his face change as he read through Cassandra's emails. When he finished, he sat heavily on the bed beside me, looking older than I had seen him in years. She really believes this, he said quietly. She's not trying to hurt us. She genuinely thinks she's saving us from ourselves. That was perhaps the most disturbing realization of all. This wasn't malicious. It was worse than malicious. It was paternalistic. Cassandra had appointed herself the expert on our happiness, the authority on our needs, the judge of whether our choices were sufficient. She decided that our contentment was actually resignation. Our privacy was actually fear. Our simple pleasures were actually settling for less than we deserved. And she'd acted on those assumptions without ever asking if they were true. The sound of footsteps drifted through our bedroom window. 30 people enjoying food we couldn't eat, celebrating a version of our marriage that existed only in Cassandra's imagination, participating in an event that had nothing to do with who we actually were or what we actually wanted. Gerald took my hand, and we sat there in silence, surrounded by the evidence of how thoroughly our daughter had dismissed our autonomy. The guest list of strangers, the menu of foods we couldn't eat, the 6-hour timeline that trapped us in our own home, the photographer documenting our discomfort for posterity, the business emails treating our marriage as content for professional advancement. We have to do something, I said finally. Gerald nodded, his jaw set in a way I recognized from the few times in our marriage when he'd been truly angry. We can't let this continue. If we don't stand up now, she'll do this for our 30th anniversary, our retirement, every milestone until we die.
Through our window, we could hear the string quartet launching into another song from our wedding, played for an audience that had no connection to its meaning. Our love story was being performed for strangers while we hid in our bedroom, feeling like prisoners in our own home. The question was no longer whether we needed to act. The question was whether we had the strength to disappoint our daughter in order to reclaim our lives. Gerald and I were still sitting on our bed, trying to process the full scope of what we'd discovered when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my sister Lydia, who lived 2 hours north in Redwood City. "Cassie called me about your party. So sorry I can't make it. David's in the hospital with his back surgery. But she sounded so excited about surprising you both. Hope you're having a wonderful time celebrating." I stared at the message, feeling another piece of the puzzle click into place. Cassandra had even called my sister, the one person who knew us well enough to understand that we'd never want a surprise party. But Lydia was dealing with her husband's medical crisis and had simply responded politely without thinking to warn us. "We need to call someone," I said suddenly. "Someone who knows us well enough to tell us we're not crazy for being upset about this." Gerald nodded immediately. "What about Ruth?" Ruth Kowalski had been our next-door neighbor for 12 years before moving to Walnut Creek when her husband retired. She was the only person who'd witnessed enough of Cassandra's boundary violations to understand the pattern. More importantly, she was the one person who'd ever directly told us that we were too accommodating with our daughter. I found Ruth's number and stepped into our walk-in closet, the only place in the house where I might have privacy from the chaos outside. She answered on the second ring. "Diane, how lovely to hear from you. How are you and Gerald?" "Ruth, I need your honest opinion about something." The words tumbled out before I could second-guess myself. "We're in a difficult situation with Cassandra, and I'm starting to think we might be going crazy." "Oh, honey, what's she done now?" The fact that Ruth's first response was to ask what Cassandra had done rather than assume we were overreacting was already a relief. I told her everything. The anniversary party, the 30 uninvited guests, our canceled Mendocino trip, the business emails, the 6-hour timeline, the food we couldn't eat. Ruth was silent for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "Diane, do you remember what I told you 5 years ago after Cassandra threw that retirement party you didn't want?" "I do remember. Ruth had cornered me in our kitchen while Gerald was outside thanking guests for coming to a celebration he'd specifically asked not to have. Diane, that girl is going to plan your funeral whether you're dead or not if you don't start standing up to her." "You said she was going to plan our funeral whether we were dead or not," I replied quietly. "And here we are, 5 years later, and she's essentially done exactly that. She's planned a celebration of your marriage without any input from the people who are actually married." Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. "Honey, you and Gerald are two of the kindest, most thoughtful people I know, but you've taught that girl that your feelings don't matter as much as her grand gestures." "But she means well," I said automatically, the phrase that had become our family motto. "Diane, stop." Ruth's voice cut through my rationalization. "I'm going to tell you something I should have said years ago. Good intentions don't excuse bad behavior. Love doesn't give someone the right to ignore your clearly stated wishes. And being family doesn't mean you have to accept treatment that you wouldn't tolerate from anyone else." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I didn't realize I'd been carrying. "But if we upset her, she'll cry. She'll say we don't appreciate everything she does for us." "Let her cry," Ruth said bluntly. "She's a grown woman, not a toddler. Her tears are not your responsibility, especially when they're being used to manipulate you into accepting behavior that makes you miserable." "I just don't know how to," I started, then stopped. I didn't know how to finish that sentence. "How to disappoint her?" Ruth supplied. "Diane, you've been so focused on not disappointing Cassandra that you've forgotten you're allowed to disappoint her. You're allowed to have preferences she doesn't like. You're allowed to say no to things she wants to do for you. You're allowed to live your life according to your own values instead of hers." Through the closet door, I could hear the string quartet starting another song. Our songs, being played for strangers who didn't know their significance, turned into background music for conversations that had nothing to do with our marriage. "She's going to hate us," I whispered. "She's not going to," Ruth said firmly.
She's going to be angry and hurt and probably throw a tantrum worthy of a 2-year-old. But underneath all that drama, she might finally learn something important, that other people are separate human beings with their own feelings and preferences, not supporting characters in her life story. What if we're wrong? What if we're being ungrateful?
Diane, let me ask you something. If a stranger walked into your house, rearranged all your furniture, invited 30 people over without asking, and then expected you to be grateful because they meant well, how would you react? I'd call the police, I said automatically. Exactly. But because it's your daughter, you're questioning whether you have the right to be upset. That's not healthy, honey. That's not love. That's fear disguised as politeness. I heard Gerald's voice in the hallway, probably making excuses to someone about my absence. The sound of his discomfort made my decision easier. Ruth, what would you do if you were in our position right now? I'd walk out there, thank everyone for coming, explain that there was a miscommunication, and send them home. I'd tell my daughter that while I appreciated her intention to celebrate us, planning events without our consent was not acceptable. And then I'd drive to Mendocino and have the anniversary I actually wanted. Just like that? Just like that. Diane, you've spent 25 years building a marriage based on mutual respect and consideration. Don't let anyone, not even your daughter, teach you that those values don't matter. After I hung up with Ruth, I sat in the closet for a few more minutes, letting her words sink in. Then I called our old friend, Michael Torres, Gerald's former colleague who'd become one of our closest friends after his retirement. Michael had watched Cassandra's pattern of overwhelming us with unwanted gestures for years, and he'd never been shy about expressing his opinion. "Diane, how's the anniversary celebration going?" His tone was carefully neutral, which told me Cassandra had probably given him some version of events that didn't match reality. "Michael, did Cassandra invite you to a party today?" "He did, but Carmen and I are in Santa Barbara visiting the grandkids. She seemed disappointed that we couldn't make it, said you and Gerald would be heartbroken if we missed your special day." "We didn't know about the party until an hour ago." There was a long pause. "Come again?" I explained the situation, watching Michael's responses shift from confusion to disbelief to anger on our behalf. "That's unconscionable," he said finally. "Diane, you and Gerald are the most self-aware, intentional people I know. If you wanted a big party, you'd have planned one. The fact that you didn't should have been her first clue." "She thinks we're too shy to celebrate ourselves properly." "That's not shyness. That's preference. There's a difference. You two celebrate each other beautifully, just quietly. I've watched you for 15 years, and I've never seen two people more genuinely devoted to each other. But Cassandra can't see quiet love because it doesn't look like a party." "So what do? "You take your power back," Michael said without hesitation. "You stop letting her decide what your important moments should look like. You stop accepting good intentions as an excuse for steamrolling your clearly expressed wishes. And you stop teaching her that your feelings are less important than her need to orchestrate grand gestures." "She's going to be devastated." "She's going to be educated," Michael corrected. "There's a difference. Diane, devastating her would be cruel and unnecessary. Educating her about boundaries is a gift to her and to anyone she'll be in relationship with for the rest of her life." When I finally emerged from the closet, Gerald was waiting with a look of quiet determination I hadn't seen in years. I called Tom Bradley. He referred to his former boss, who'd become a trusted friend. He confirmed that Cassandra called his office looking for my old colleague's contact information. She told his secretary that we were too shy to invite ourselves, but that we'd specifically mentioned missing the old gang. We never said that. I know. Tom figured that out pretty quickly when I called him just now. He said he'd been wondering why we'd want a big party when we'd always been so private about personal matters. What did he say when you told him the truth? He said what Ruth and Michael said. that it was time we stopped being more concerned about Cassandra's feelings than our own. We looked at each other across our bedroom, two people who'd spent decades building a life based on mutual respect and quiet understanding, now trapped in our own home by someone who claimed to love us but couldn't see us clearly enough to respect our choices. "Are we really going to do this?" I asked. Gerald took my hand, the same gesture he'd made on our wedding day when the minister asked if he was ready to commit to building a life together. "We're going to do this." Through our bedroom window, we could hear the photographer directing people into groups for pictures, creating artificial memories of an event that felt nothing like our actual marriage. 30 strangers were documenting our anniversary while we hid in our bedroom, feeling like prisoners in our own celebration. But something had shifted. Ruth's voice echoing in my mind, "You're allowed to disappoint her." Michael's clarity, "You take your power back." And Tom's validation, "You'd always been so private about personal matters." 3 people who knew us well had confirmed what we'd been afraid to trust, that our preferences were valid, our boundaries were reasonable, and our quiet way of loving each other was not a problem to be solved.
For the first time in 25 years of parenting, we were going to prioritize our own feelings over our daughter's expectations. We were going to disappoint her in order to save ourselves. The question was, did we have the courage to walk out there and reclaim our anniversary? Gerald and I stood at our bedroom window, looking down at the scene in our backyard like generals surveying a battlefield. The photographer was positioning groups of guests around our patio furniture, directing them to smile and laugh for pictures that would supposedly capture the joy of our anniversary celebration. None of them looked particularly joyful, mostly confused and slightly uncomfortable, like actors who'd forgotten their lines. "We need a plan," Gerald said quietly. "We can't just march out there and tell 30 people to leave without some kind of strategy." He was right. The conversations with Ruth, Michael, and Tom had given us the emotional permission to act, but we still needed to figure out how to execute our decision without causing unnecessary pain to innocent people who'd made genuine efforts to be here. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. First, we need to separate the people from the problem. Most of these guests are here because they care about us, even if they don't know us well. They deserve honesty, not hostility. Agreed. And we need to handle Cassandra separately. She's not going to take this well, and we don't want to humiliate her in front of everyone. We spent the next 20 minutes crafting what Gerald called our diplomatic exit strategy. We would go downstairs together, thank everyone for coming, explain that there had been a miscommunication about our anniversary plans, and graciously send them home with some of the food to take with them. Then we would have a private conversation with Cassandra about boundaries and respect. "What about the vendors?" I asked. "The photographer, the caterers, the musicians?" "We pay them for their time and release them from their contracts. This isn't their fault, and they shouldn't suffer financially because of our family dynamics." "And if she throws a tantrum?" Gerald was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "Then we let her throw a tantrum. Ruth was right. Her emotional reactions are not our responsibility. We're not required to set ourselves on fire to keep our adult daughter warm." The phrase hit me like a revelation. We're not required to set ourselves on fire to keep our adult daughter warm. How many years had we spent doing exactly that? How many of our own preferences had we sacrificed to avoid her disappointment? How many boundaries had we failed to maintain because enforcing them might make her cry? "There's something else we need to discuss," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If we do this, if we really stand up to her, our relationship with Cassandra is going to change forever. She might not forgive us for this." Gerald took my hand, his thumb tracing the wedding ring he'd placed there 25 years ago. "Diane, what kind of relationship do we have with her now? One where she makes all the decisions about our lives and we pretend to be grateful? One where our feelings only matter if they align with her vision? One where she gets to override our choices whenever she thinks she knows better?" He was right, and I knew it. But saying it out loud felt like admitting we'd failed as parents somehow. Maybe we should have set better boundaries when she was younger.
Maybe we should have, Gerald agreed. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what we're going to accept going forward. I looked down at my notebook, at the plan we'd outlined for reclaiming our anniversary. It felt both terrifying and liberating. For 25 years of marriage, Gerald and I had made decisions together, respected each other's feelings, and built a life based on mutual consideration. But when it came to our daughter, we'd somehow forgotten that those same principles should apply. What if she never speaks to us again? The fear that had been haunting me finally found words. Gerald was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was sad but resolute. Then we'll grieve that loss, and we'll move forward. But Diane, we can't keep sacrificing our dignity and autonomy just to maintain a relationship with someone who doesn't respect us enough to consider our feelings. Even if that someone is our daughter? Especially if that someone is our daughter. We raised her to be independent, thoughtful, and considerate. If she's choosing to be controlling and dismissive instead, that's not our fault, and it's not our job to enable it. Through our window, we could see Cassandra directing the photographer to capture candid moments of guests enjoying themselves. She was in her element, orchestrating every detail, completely confident that she was creating something beautiful and meaningful. The disconnect between her perception and our reality was staggering. She really believes she's helping us, I said, watching our daughter pose with some of Gerald's coworkers for pictures that would supposedly document our joy. I know, and that's what makes this so hard. If she were being malicious, this would be easier. But she's not trying to hurt us. She's trying to fix us. She thinks our quiet happiness is a problem that needs solving.
Maybe it is, I said suddenly, the doubt that had been plaguing me surfacing again. Maybe we are too quiet, too private, too content with small things. Maybe she's right that we should celebrate more, be more social, let people love us properly. Gerald turned to face me fully, his expression serious. Diane, listen to me. There is nothing wrong with the way we love each other. There is nothing wrong with preferring quiet celebrations to public spectacles. There is nothing wrong with being content with simple pleasures. We are not broken people who need fixing. But what if... No. His voice was gentle but firm. We are not going to second-guess 25 years of happiness just because our daughter can't understand it. We are not going to let her convince us that our marriage is somehow insufficient because it doesn't look like a magazine spread. He was right, but the conditioning ran deep. We'd spent so many years accepting Cassandra's judgment of our choices that questioning her had begun to feel like questioning ourselves. I need you to say it, Gerald continued. I need you to say that our way of loving each other is valid. Our way of loving each other is valid. I repeated, and as I said the words, I felt something shift inside me. Our preference for privacy is valid. Our contentment with simple pleasures is valid. Our desire to celebrate our anniversary quietly is valid. And Cassandra doesn't get to override our choices just because she thinks her way is better. Gerald smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. There's my wife, the woman who chose to marry me because we understood each other, not because we needed fixing. A knock on our bedroom door interrupted the moment. Mom? Dad? Cassandra's voice carried through the wood. People are asking where you are. The photographer wants to take some photos of you two with the anniversary cake before we bring out the main course. And Mrs. Henderson has been asking about that story you told her once about your first date. I think she wants to include it in her toast. Gerald and I looked at each other. This was it, the moment of decision. We could open that door and continue playing our assigned roles as grateful parents who never complained about their daughter's generosity. We could smile for photos that documented our performance rather than our reality. We could eat food we couldn't digest while making small talk with strangers who didn't know our story. Or we could open that door and reclaim our anniversary. Just a minute, honey, I called back. Dad and I are coming down now. Gerald squeezed my hand. Are you ready for this? I thought about our packed suitcases sitting in the closet, ready for the romantic weekend we'd planned. I thought about the quiet restaurant overlooking the ocean where we'd made dinner reservations. I thought about the morning walks on the beach we'd been looking forward to, the private conversations about our memories and dreams, the intimate celebration of a love story that belonged to us alone. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time in hours, I meant it. We stood up together, smoothed our clothes, and walked toward the door. On the other side was our daughter, waiting to direct us in the performance of our own anniversary. Behind her were 30 people who'd come to celebrate a version of our marriage that existed only in her imagination. But we weren't actors anymore. We were going to be ourselves, two people who'd built a beautiful marriage based on mutual respect and quiet understanding, two people who'd finally remembered that their own feelings mattered as much as anyone else's. Two people who were going to disappoint their daughter in order to save their anniversary. Gerald reached for the door handle, then paused. "Whatever happens down there, I want you to know that these 25 years with you have been exactly what I wanted. Quiet, peaceful, and perfect." "Even this part?" I asked, gesturing toward the chaos waiting for us. "Even this part. Because we're facing it together and we're choosing each other over everyone else's expectations, just like we promised we would 25 years ago." He opened the door and we stepped into the hallway hand in hand, ready to have the most difficult conversation of our parenting lives, ready to teach our daughter that love without respect is not love at all, ready to show her that boundaries are not cruelty, they're kindness to ourselves and to the people we're trying to teach how to treat us, ready to reclaim our anniversary and our autonomy, no matter what it cost us. The performance was over. The truth was about to begin. We found Cassandra in the kitchen, frantically checking her phone and coordinating with Rosa about the timing for the main course. She looked up when we entered, her face bright with the kind of manic energy that came from orchestrating what she believed was a perfect event. "There you are. I was starting to worry. The photographer has been waiting to get some shots of you two with the anniversary cake before we bring out the dinner. And Mrs. Henderson has been asking about that story you told her once about your first date. I think she wants to include it in her toast." Gerald and I looked at each other. This was it, the moment of decision. We could open that door and continue playing our assigned roles as grateful parents who never complained about their daughter's generosity.
"Cassandra," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "We need to talk, privately." "Mom, can it wait? We're right in the middle of the dinner timing, and I promised people we'd do the toasts before 8 so the older guests could leave early if they wanted to." "No, it can't wait." Gerald's voice carried a quiet authority that made Cassandra look up from her phone. "This is important." She must have heard something in his tone that finally registered, because she set her phone down and gave us her full attention for the first time since we'd arrived home. "Okay, what's wrong? You both look upset." "We are upset," I said simply. "Cassandra, we need you to understand something. We never wanted this party. We had our own plans for our anniversary, and you've canceled them without asking us." "Mom, I didn't cancel anything. You can go to Mendocino anytime. This is a once-in-a-lifetime celebration." "No, it can't wait." Gerald's voice firm. "We cannot go to Mendocino anytime. We made those reservations 6 months ago. We planned this trip specifically for our anniversary. We were looking forward to it." Cassandra's face shifted through several expressions. Confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like panic. "But this is so much better than just sitting in some hotel room. Look at all the people who came to celebrate you. Look at how beautiful everything is." "Cassandra, we don't want to be celebrated by 30 strangers. We want to celebrate with each other, quietly, privately, the way we always do." "But that's not really celebrating," she protested, her voice rising slightly. "That's just existing. You deserve more than that." There it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven years of boundary violations. In Cassandra's mind, our contentment was settling, our privacy was hiding, our simple pleasures were insufficient. According to who? Gerald asked quietly. Who decided that our way of celebrating wasn't enough? I wanted to give you something special, something worthy of 25 years of marriage. Our marriage is already special, I said. It doesn't need your validation or enhancement. It doesn't need to be performed for an audience to be meaningful. Cassandra's eyes filled with tears, the same tears that had derailed 1,000 conversations over the years. But this time, fortified by Ruth's words and our own resolution, I didn't immediately move to comfort her. "But I worked so hard on this," she whispered. "I've been planning it for months. I invited all these people. I hired vendors. I created this beautiful celebration for you." "You created this celebration for yourself," Gerald said, his voice gentle but unwavering. "You planned the party you thought we should want, not the anniversary we actually wanted." "That's not true," her voice cracked. "Everything I did was for you. The flowers you love, the music from your wedding, the guest list of people who care about you." "Cassie," I said, using her childhood nickname to soften what I was about to say, "we ordered food we can't eat because we're diabetic. You invited people we haven't spoken to in years. You scheduled this party during the exact time we told you we'd be out of town. How is any of that for us?" She stared at us, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words that wouldn't come. I thought you'd be happy. I thought you'd be grateful." "We are grateful for your love," Gerald said carefully. "But we cannot be grateful for having our choices dismissed and our boundaries ignored, even if it comes from a place of love." "So you're saying I'm a terrible daughter?" The tears were flowing freely now, and I could see the emotional manipulation beginning, the pattern we'd fallen for so many times before. But this time, fortified by Ruth's words and our own resolution, I didn't immediately move to comfort her. "But I worked so hard on this. I've been planning it for months. I invited all these people. I hired vendors. I created this beautiful celebration for you." "You created this celebration for yourself," Gerald said, his voice quiet but sharp. "You planned the party you thought we should want, not the anniversary we actually wanted." "That's not true," her voice cracked. "Everything I did was for you. The flowers you love, the music from your wedding, the guest list of people who care about you." "Cassie," I said firmly, "we don't want people to see us. We want to see each other. We want to enjoy each other's company without an audience. We want to celebrate our marriage privately because that's how we've always celebrated everything that matters to us." "But that's not normal." "Normal according to who?" Gerald's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Normal according to your friends? Normal according to magazines? Normal according to your business model?" Cassandra's face went pale. "What do you mean, my business model?" "We found your emails, Cassandra. We know this party is going in your portfolio. We know you're using our anniversary as a networking opportunity. We know you charged everything to our credit card without asking." If I'd thought she was crying before, I was wrong. Now she was sobbing, her whole body shaking with the force of her emotions. "You weren't supposed to see those. It wasn't supposed to be about business. I just thought, if I was going to do this anyway, maybe I could get some professional benefit from it too." "Do you hear yourself?" I asked, my own voice starting to rise. "You thought you'd do this anyway without our consent, so you might as well profit from it? How is that love, Cassandra? How is that respect?" "Because I love you more than you love yourselves," she screamed, her composure completely shattered. "Because you're content with crumbs when you deserve a feast. Because you've forgotten how to let people love you properly." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of her sobbing and the distant murmur of 30 people in our backyard, waiting for a celebration that was never going to happen. "Cassandra," Gerald said, finally, his voice heavy with sadness, We need you to go outside and tell everyone the party is over. Explain that there was a miscommunication about our anniversary plans. Thank them for coming and send them home." "I can't do that," she whispered. "It will humiliate me in front of everyone." "You should have thought about that before you planned a party without asking the guests of honor if they wanted it," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Mom, please, just this once. Just smile and get through it. For me." There it was, the plea that had worked for 25 years. Just this once, just smile and get through it. Just sacrifice your own feelings to spare mine. Just pretend to be grateful for something you never wanted because it's easier than disappointing me. "No," I said simply. "What?" "No. I will not smile and get through it. I will not pretend to be grateful for having my anniversary stolen. I will not perform happiness for 30 strangers while my actual happiness is dismissed as insufficient." Cassandra looked between Gerald and me like she was seeing us for the first time. "You're serious? You're actually going to ruin this?" "We're not ruining anything," Gerald said quietly. "We're reclaiming something that belonged to us in the first place." "And if I refuse? If I tell everyone you're being unreasonable and ungrateful?" Gerald and I looked at each other, and I saw my own resolve reflected in his eyes. "Then you'll be lying," I said calmly, "and you'll be showing everyone exactly who you really are." The threat hung in the air between us. For the first time in our relationship with our daughter, we weren't backing down. We weren't negotiating. We weren't explaining or justifying or apologizing for our feelings. We were simply stating our boundary and waiting to see what she would choose to do with it. Cassandra stared at us for a long moment, her face cycling through anger, disbelief, and something that might have been respect. Finally, she wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "I'll go tell 30 people who drove hours to celebrate you that my parents are too selfish to appreciate a beautiful gesture. I'll explain that you'd rather hide in some hotel room than let people who care about you show that they care." "You can tell them whatever you want," Gerald said calmly, "but the party is over." As Cassandra walked toward the back door, her shoulders rigid with anger and humiliation, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in 25 years of parenting, we had chosen our own feelings over our daughter's expectations. We had disappointed her in order to save ourselves. And despite the pain of watching her walk away angry, despite the knowledge that our relationship might never be the same, it felt like the first honest thing we'd done as parents in decades. The confrontation was over. Now we had to face the consequences. Through the kitchen window, Gerald and I watched Cassandra march into our backyard with the purposeful stride of someone about to make a dramatic announcement. We couldn't hear her words exactly, but we could see the shocked expressions ripple through the crowd as she spoke. Some people immediately began gathering their belongings, while others clustered together in confused conversations, glancing toward our house with puzzled faces. "We should go out there," Gerald said quietly. "We need to handle this ourselves." He was right. Hiding in the kitchen while our daughter managed the aftermath of our decision felt cowardly. Whatever mess we'd created by standing up for ourselves, we needed to face it directly. We walked outside together, and the conversations gradually died down as people noticed us. The silence was uncomfortable, but not hostile, mostly just bewildered. These were good people who'd made genuine efforts to celebrate us, and they deserved better than to be caught in the middle of our family dysfunction. "I want to apologize to everyone," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet backyard. "There seems to have been some confusion about our anniversary plans. Gerald and I are incredibly touched that you all took time out of your Saturday to be here, but we actually had other commitments for today." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her face kind but confused. "Cassandra said you'd specifically asked for all of us to be here. She said it was your dream anniversary party." "Cassandra meant well," Gerald replied diplomatically, "but she may have misunderstood our preferences. We're very private people, and we'd actually planned a quiet celebration." I could see Cassandra standing at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, her face a mixture of humiliation and defiance. She was letting us handle the explanation, but her body language clearly communicated that she thought we were making a terrible mistake. Please, everyone, take some food home with you. Rosa has prepared far too much for 2 people, and we'd hate for it to go to waste. And again, we're so sorry for the confusion. People began moving efficiently toward the catering tables, and I was struck by how gracious they were being about the awkward situation. No one seemed angry or offended, mostly just sympathetic to what they probably perceived as a family miscommunication. Jim Patterson from Gerald's office approached us with a plate of appetizers. You know, Gerald, I was wondering why you hadn't mentioned this party when I saw you at lunch last week. It seemed like the kind of thing you'd bring up. That's because I didn't know about it until today, Gerald admitted. Jim's eyebrows rose slightly, and I could see understanding dawn in his eyes. Ah, well, in that case, congratulations on 25 years, and I hope you get to celebrate the way you actually want to. One by one, people came by to offer their congratulations and gentle understanding. Some admitted they'd been surprised by the invitation because they knew we were private people. Others mentioned that Cassandra had seemed unusually insistent about their attendance, using phrases like, "they need this," and "it would mean everything to them." The photographer approached us with his equipment bag slung over his shoulder. "Mrs. Hartwell, your daughter said you'd be paying me directly. My invoice is for $600. I felt Gerald tense beside me, but I nodded calmly. "Of course, we'll write you a check." As people slowly filtered out of our backyard, taking plates of food and offering apologetic smiles, I found myself in conversation with Maria Santos, a woman I barely knew from my old library job. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. "You know, I have 4 children, and they all think they know what's best for me. Last Christmas, my youngest son threw me a surprise party because he thought I was too lonely. I had to explain to him that being alone is not the same as being lonely, and that solitude can be a choice, not a sentence." "What did you say to him?" "I told him that love means accepting people as they are, not trying to fix them into who you think they should be." She patted my arm gently. "Your daughter will figure that out eventually. Some children just take longer to realize their parents are real people with their own preferences." After the last guest had left, we found ourselves alone in our backyard with Cassandra, Rosa the caterer, and the string quartet who were efficiently packing up their instruments. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across our lawn, and the fairy lights Cassandra had strung through our trees twinkled mockingly in the gathering dusk. "I need to settle up with the vendors," I told Gerald, and spent the next 30 minutes writing checks and making polite conversation with people who were clearly trying to navigate an awkward situation with professional grace. Rosa was particularly kind. "Your daughter spoke about you both with such love. Sometimes the people who care about us most have trouble seeing us clearly. I hope you get to have your quiet celebration." When the vendors had all been paid and dismissed, it was just the 3 of us standing in our backyard among the remnants of a party none of us had really enjoyed. Cassandra had been silent throughout the cleanup process, but I could feel her anger radiating across the space between us. 30 people, she said finally, her voice flat. 30 people who took time out of their Saturday to celebrate you, and you sent them home with doggy bags like they were unwanted dinner guests? "They weren't unwanted," Gerald said patiently. "They were uninvited. There's a difference." "This is exactly what I was talking about," Cassandra continued, her voice rising. "You don't know how to let people love you. You don't know how to accept kindness. You don't know how to be grateful for gestures that most people would kill for." "Cassandra," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "we are grateful for the love, but we cannot be grateful for having our choices ignored. Can you understand the difference?" "No, I can't," she exploded. "I planned the most beautiful anniversary celebration anyone could ask for, and you're treating it like I committed some kind of crime."
"You did commit a crime," Gerald said quietly. "You committed it against our autonomy. You decided what our anniversary should look like without consulting us. You overrode our existing plans without discussion. You spent our money without permission. You manipulated people into attending by claiming we wanted them here when we'd never expressed any such desire. I was trying to give you something wonderful." "You were trying to give us something you thought was wonderful," I corrected, "without ever asking if we agreed." Cassandra stared at us, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Finally, she said, "So what happens now? You've humiliated me in front of 30 people.
You've made me look like a daughter who doesn't understand her own parents. You've turned what should have been a beautiful memory into a disaster. What happens now is that you learn something important about boundaries and respect, Gerald said firmly. What happens now is that you stop planning our lives for us and start asking what we actually want. And if I don't? If I think you're wrong about what you want? Then you respect our right to be wrong, I said simply. Because they're our lives, not yours. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of 25 years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding. I could see Cassandra struggling with concepts she'd never really considered, that good intentions don't justify boundary violations, that love without respect is not really love, that her parents were separate people with their own valid preferences. "I don't know how to do that," she said finally, her voice small. "I don't know how to watch you settle for less than you deserve." "You start by trusting that we're capable of knowing what we deserve," Gerald said gently. "You start by believing that we're intelligent adults who can make our own decisions about our own lives." "But what if your decisions are wrong?" "Then there are wrong decisions to make," I said. "Cassandra, you can't save people from themselves. You can't force happiness on people who don't want the kind of happiness you're offering. You can't love someone into being who you think they should be." She was crying again, but quietly this time, without the dramatic sobbing of earlier. "I just wanted you to have something special." "We were going to have something special," Gerald said sadly. "A quiet weekend by the ocean, talking about our memories and dreams. That was special to us. That was exactly what we wanted." "Can you still go?" I looked at Gerald and we both shrugged. "The reservations are for tomorrow night. If we left right now, we could drive up this evening and still have most of our weekend." "Then go," Cassandra said, wiping her eyes. "I'll clean up here. I'll handle everything." It was a small gesture, but it was the first time all day that she'd offered to do something we actually wanted. The first time she'd prioritized our preferences over her own vision. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I'm sure. I'm sorry I ruined your anniversary. I'm sorry I didn't ask what you wanted. I'm sorry I thought I knew better than you did about your own lives." It wasn't a complete transformation. That would take time, and probably more difficult conversations. But it was a beginning. An acknowledgement that we were separate people with our own agency, our own preferences, our own right to make decisions about our own celebration. Gerald and I looked at each other and saw the same thought reflected in both our faces. We could salvage this. We could still have our anniversary, even if it was starting 6 hours later than planned. "We'll pack quickly," I said. "Thank you for understanding." As we turned to go into the house, Cassandra called after us. "Mom? Dad?" We turned back. "Happy anniversary. I hope Mendocino is everything you wanted it to be." For the first time all day, her words felt completely genuine. No hidden agenda, no attempt to manage our feelings, no subtle suggestion that we should want something different. Just a daughter wishing her parents well on their own terms. It was the best anniversary gift she could have given us. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our Mendocino bed and breakfast, watching Gerald pour coffee into 2 mismatched ceramic mugs while the Pacific Ocean sparkled through the window behind him. We'd returned to the same place for a long weekend, not because we were trying to recreate our anniversary, but because we'd genuinely fallen in love with the quiet rhythm of this coastal town during that salvaged weekend in September. The Hendersons sent another invitation, their 40th anniversary party. Black tie optional, cocktail reception, live band. I smiled, remembering how 6 months ago that invitation would have filled me with dread, the obligation to attend, the guilt if we declined, the exhausting performance of gratitude for celebrations that felt nothing like us. Now I felt only mild amusement and complete clarity about our response. "I'll send regrets with a nice note," I said, and Gerald nodded. It was that simple now.
We'd learned to say no without explanation, apology, or justification. We'd learned that our preferences did not require defense.
The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks after our anniversary confrontation had been difficult, marked by hurt feelings, awkward silences, and the strange sensation of having changed the fundamental dynamics of our most important relationships. Cassandra had barely spoken to us for a month, communicating only through terse text messages about practical matters. But slowly, something interesting had begun to happen. With the pressure removed to constantly manage Cassandra's emotions and accommodate her grand gestures, Gerald and I had rediscovered parts of ourselves we'd forgotten existed. We'd started taking evening walks again, something we'd gradually abandoned as our free time became consumed with attending events we hadn't requested. We'd resumed our Saturday morning ritual of reading the newspaper together in bed, a simple pleasure that had somehow gotten lost in the chaos of family obligations. Most surprisingly, we'd both begun pursuing interests we'd set aside years earlier. Gerald had rejoined the astronomy club he'd belonged to before marriage, spending clear nights at the observatory with his telescope and a thermos of coffee. I'd started writing again, not the academic papers I'd once published, but personal essays about marriage, boundaries, and the courage required to disappoint people you love. The first real breakthrough with Cassandra had come in November, 2 months after our anniversary debacle. She'd called to invite us to Thanksgiving dinner at her apartment, but instead of her usual elaborate production, she'd asked a simple question. Would you prefer a big dinner with all my friends or just the three of us? The question was so unexpected that I'd been silent for several seconds, trying to process this new version of my daughter who actually wanted to know what we preferred, rather than assuming she knew better. Just the three of us would be wonderful, I said, and heard her exhale in what sounded like relief. That Thanksgiving had been revelatory. Without an audience to perform for, without elaborate decorations and professional-level food presentation, Cassandra had been more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. We'd talked about her work, her relationships, her hopes for the future. Actual conversation rather than the superficial pleasantries that usually filled our family gatherings. More importantly, she'd begun asking questions about our lives that she'd never bothered to ask before. What did we actually do during our quiet evenings at home? What made us choose astronomy and writing as hobbies? What did we love about Mendocino that made us want to return? I realized I never really knew you as people, she'd admitted over dessert. I knew you as my parents, but I never bothered to learn about your individual personalities, your actual interests, what genuinely made you happy versus what I thought should make you happy. It was the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one based on curiosity rather than assumptions, respect rather than control, acceptance rather than the need to fix or improve us. The changes hadn't been limited to our family dynamics. Word had somehow spread through our social circle about our anniversary stand, and the response had been surprisingly positive. Several friends had approached us privately to share their own stories of being overwhelmed by well-meaning family members who couldn't accept their preferences for quieter celebrations. Ruth had been particularly vindicated. I told you that girl needed to learn about boundaries, she'd said when we'd called to update her. How's she handling the new normal? Better than we expected, I admitted. She's actually started asking our opinion before making plans that involve us. Miracles do happen, Ruth had replied dryly. Michael and Carmen Torres had invited us to join them for New Year's Eve. Not a party, but a quiet evening of conversation and champagne, watching the celebration on television from the comfort of our respective living rooms via video call. It was exactly the kind of low-key observance we preferred, and the fact that they'd thought to offer it showed how much our willingness to advocate for ourselves had clarified our relationships with others. Even our relationship with each other had deepened. The process of standing up to Cassandra together had reminded us that we were a team, that our marriage was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. We'd remembered what it felt like to prioritize each other's happiness over external expectations, to make decisions based on our own desires rather than other people's definitions of what our lives should look like. I've been thinking about retirement, Gerald said now, settling into the window seat beside me with his coffee. It was a conversation we'd been having more frequently, no longer postponed by the energy required to manage family drama and social obligations we didn't want. What about it? About what we actually want to do with it, Not what people expect us to do, not the senior center activities or the endless volunteering or the group travel that everyone assumes we'll want. What do we actually want? I considered the question, watching a pair of pelicans glide past our window. 6 months ago, I would have felt obliged to want the kind of retirement that looked appropriately active and social to outside observers. Now I felt free to want what I actually wanted. I want more mornings like this, I said honestly. More time to read, more time to write, more time to have conversations that matter. I want to travel, but slowly, staying in places long enough to understand them rather than checking items off a list. I want to know our neighbors better, but on our own terms, not because we feel obligated to be social.
Gerald smiled. That sounds perfect. Wonderfully, quietly perfect. My phone buzzed with a text message from Cassandra. Hi, Mom. Planning a small dinner party next Saturday for my birthday. Would you and Dad like to come? No pressure if you have other plans, and let me know if there's anything you can't eat. Love you. I showed the message to Gerald, and we both marveled at it. 6 months ago, Cassandra's birthday would have been an elaborate production with a guest list of 50 people, a themed menu we had no input on, and an assumption that we would not only attend, but be grateful for the privilege. Now she was asking about our availability, our dietary restrictions, our actual preferences. Should we go? Gerald asked. I thought about it. A small dinner party with people we actually knew and enjoyed, planned by someone who was finally learning to consider our feelings alongside her own desires. Yes, I said, I think we should. I typed back, we'd love to come. Gerald can't have shellfish, and I'm still avoiding too much sugar, but otherwise we're easy. What can we bring? Her response came quickly. Just yourselves. So happy you can make it. Just ourselves, not the performances we'd once been expected to give, not the gratitude we'd been required to display for gestures we'd never requested, just ourselves, which had turned out to be enough once people learned to see us clearly. That evening, we walked along the Mendocino bluffs as the sun set over the Pacific, talking about our plans for Gerald retirement, my writing projects, and the quiet life we were building together. We talked about Cassandra's continued growth, about the friends who'd proven themselves capable of respecting our boundaries, about the surprising peace that had come from learning to disappoint people when necessary. Do you ever regret it? Gerald asked as we paused to watch the last light fade from the horizon. Standing up to her that day, the confrontation, the awkwardness, all of it? I considered the question seriously. The old version of myself might have felt guilty about the pain we'd caused Cassandra, the embarrassment she'd experienced, the difficult lessons she'd been forced to learn. But I thought about the 6 months that had followed, the genuine conversations, the mutual respect, the freedom to be ourselves without apology or explanation. No, I said finally, I regret that we took 25 years to do it. I regret that we taught her for so long that our feelings were negotiable, but I don't regret finally choosing our own happiness over her need to control our choices. Gerald squeezed my hand. Happy anniversary, by the way. I laughed, realizing he was right. It had been exactly 6 months since our confrontation, 6 months since we'd reclaimed our anniversary, and in the process, reclaimed ourselves. It seemed worth celebrating, quietly, privately, in exactly the way we preferred. Happy anniversary, I agreed, to us, and to learning that love includes the right to be ourselves. We stood there on the bluffs as the darkness settled over the ocean, two people who'd spent 25 years building a marriage based on mutual respect and quiet understanding, who'd temporarily lost themselves in the effort to please others and had finally remembered that their own happiness was not just valid, but necessary. Behind us, the lights of Mendocino twinkled like stars, welcoming us back to the life we'd chosen for ourselves. Ahead of us stretched years of retirement, of deeper friendship, of conversations that mattered, and celebrations that reflected our actual values rather than other people's expectations. It was exactly the kind of anniversary we'd always wanted, not the performance of love for an audience, but the quiet, genuine experience of it between two people who'd learned finally and completely to choose each other
over everyone else's definitions of what their love should look like. The transformation was complete. We were ourselves again, and that was more than enough.